Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another podcast episode of Insights by OutsideX, the one-stop shop podcast about everything from the first IPM batch at Doms Nather. Alright, today I have my first post-it made with me today because the person sitting beside me has a lot of accomplishments I couldn't fit on one paper. Right now, she has been an author, she's a YLAC fellow, one of the members which is completely central to OutsideX as a foundation, and on top of all of that, she's a current student at IIT Madras studying BS in data science. I wanted to welcome Iskandar Tiwari, or ET as we like to call her, to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Alright, so right now, we wanted to get into your, experiences about the NGO like we had for so long. So, you had gone to this place called Rani Khet where you ended up, working with an NGO, having a social impact, leaving a lot of imprints with your memories, the places you went and you saw, the impacts you created, the work you did, the people you met and the relationships you built. That's been a central, impact of everybody in the batch, but yours was essentially even more intricate because you're the one of the people that, went to the hills for your, internship experiences. So what was your whole exposure like?
Alright, so as far as going to the hills is concerned, I don't think that's much of a new thing for me because I'm from the hills and
Sure.
Ranikhet itself is not like very far away from the place where I stay. But I think the experience in itself, if you ask me to describe it, I think all ups and downs, but at the end of it, I think great memories, learning lessons, and I think I had two of the wonderful people with me, Nishita and Nishika, great people, and it was actually amazing. And I think at the end of it, the best thing was that you get learning lessons out of the things. You realize what kind of a privileged life you live and how difficult it is for some of the people there. Something as small as, let's say, waste management system that's not developed there, and then we live here with like a beautiful campus, lush green campus. So I think the one thing which, if you ask me what is the one thing which I learned around all of it, was that you don't realize how privileged the life you live until you go out of your comfort zone and actually step into a place where you see that, okay, people there, they're actually not having it and still they're happy. So I think that is the biggest learning for me.
So let's say you had to introduce Umang as a foundation or as an NGO to the entire world in this one-stop shop sentence. What would you say?
Alright, so Umang for itself, Umang is basically Umang Mahila Producers Company. Initially, there was this organization called the Grassroots Foundation, and which was started by Anita Paul and Kalyan Paul about, I say, 30-35 years ago, basically to make sure that the people who are living in the hills, they get the value for their crops, they have good water facilities, and they were providing them with seeds. And today, those are the farmers which are actually, the ones who are the seeds and the crops which are being grown there today. They are actually the ones which are a result of what was sown 30 years ago, right? So that's one. Secondly, Umang is basically like a subsidiary of all of it. So Umang is run by women of the self-help groups, and there are about 1,500 self-help groups associated with it. Apart from that, Umang has 4 verticals. We talk about honey, they talk about seasonal products or food preserves, they talk about Himkhadya, and eventually the knitwear. So Umang is basically Uttarakhand's women, the Kumaoni women, a platform for them to let's say rule the world and just show the world that the people there, the women there, they are. So Uttarakhand basically has always had this history of being not being that patriarchal as a state, you can call it. So when we talk about Umang is for the women of Uttarakhand. It is the place to present to the world that sustainable living and sustainable solutions, they come from your grassroots, they come from those indigenous women there who have been there for years and years and continue to live there despite all odds. So that's what Umang is.
Going into the specifics of this, I remember when the list for all these NGOs came out, we had, I think, about 100 NGOs that we had to choose from, and it whittled down to the top 20 that we had to apply for, right? So what went through your mind before you thought, this should be the NGO I should apply for, this should be the one that should be my top choices to get into in this place?
Alright, so I think I can classify the reasons to be 2. The first being that I've grown in the hills. I have my farmhouse in the hills and all of those places, and I've seen the conditions, I've seen the women there, and I've seen how resilient and gritty those women are. But what they lack is a platform and an opportunity to present what they are doing in front of the world. And Umang is one platform which is actually providing them that place to showcase the world. Like there were women there who had been representatives in the United Nations, telling the world about how magnificent and beautiful our culture is and our history is and our resources are, and how we are able to live that sustainably. So I think that is one thing which inspired me the most. Secondly, being an all women run organization from top to bottom, you just find everything being done by women alone, and they might not be highly educated women, and that's all right. what works there for them is they're passionate about what they're doing, and I think that is something which derived inspiration, and I won't deny being the fact that it was close to home. So like,
right. So like you said, there were 4 verticals that you had talked about in Umang. Why don't you explain, a little bit more about how the work setting, how the culture itself in Umang is when you went to work?
Alright, so Umang in itself, as I already mentioned, is an all-women organization, top to bottom, run by women. So Umang basically has 4 verticals, right? We have honey, we have the food preserves, we have Him Khadya, and then we have the knitwear. So starting with honey is something which, so basically they get the honeycombs from, let's say, the local farmers and the honey cultivators around. And then there's this entire processing unit which they have, which takes about 2 to 3 hours to prepare, let's say, 25 bottles of honey. And then they pack it, they seal it, and then they put it in the shop, which is on the middle floor. Then we have the knitwear. So the room which we were allotted, that was basically the knitwear room, wherein they were like providing orders to Fab India, there were orders to other local vendors, etc. And then tagging them, making sure that like the level of precision at which they work with. So when you knit, they made sure there was not even a difference of 1 centimeters there. They were like so precise with it. So I think that is something which struck out for me. So there were like numerous women coming around, and we even went to a lot of field visits wherein they were distributing the wool, they were collecting all the, let's say, the knitwear which they had prepared, making sure it was nice and clean, making sure they were washing it, they were steam ironing it before they were putting it in the store, all of that. Then we have the food preserves. So food preserves basically includes, you have all the jams, you have all the chutneys and all the pickles which have been made. And I think we were quite fortunate because when we went, they were actually preparing those apricot jams, and I can't describe, but those apricots were so tasty and so delicious because right from the trees, like fresh, reached right in the morning, and then we reached there around I think 9 o'clock or something, and then we just went there all smelling of like nice fruity smell, and then you saw women sitting there making sure they clean the apricots, they measured it, they removed the ones which can't be used because they're bad in quality, so a perfect quality check, a perfect hygiene check, and then we also got these small goodies about those food preserves. So that, and then finally we had Him Khadya. So Him Khadya is a part of it which talks about pulses, which talks about flour, which talks about all these other let's say food products, let's say the chamomile tea and all of that, and then the production of that, the packaging of that, and all of this is actually, so there are 2 ways how Umang sells it. The first one being wherein they sell it via their online store, and second being the shop which they have on site. So that is where all of it is sold. So that's how the whole thing functions, and that's the mechanics of it.
I feel like just by listening to it all, I can see that Umang has a very, very strong supply chain.
Yes. What I found very fascinating was, so even though Umang is based in Uttarakhand, and then the primary stakeholders there are women of Uttarakhand, so let's make it easy for everyone to understand. So there is Umang as an organization, but Umang as an organization does not keep the profit. The profit is being distributed to the 1,500 SHG women who are there. So all the women are equal stakeholders to Umang as Umang is to them. That's why there is this strong interbound and strong connection between them. And then while we have women from Uttarakhand, there is also supply, let's say the chamomile tea, or let's say the apricots or the apples, because they make jellies as well, or the guavas or the pears, they come from Himachal Pradesh and Pradesh also. And then there are fruits which are supplied from, and let's say tea, and there's this special variety of rice which comes from the northeast. So they basically have a very good and very strong supply system. Also, as far as you talked about the consumer base, I remember sitting down with Nishita and then just figuring out this consumer list, and then like sorting out all the emails and all of it. And I mean, it did become quite a tedious task separating all of that in Excel at a point of time, but then we did eventually come out to around 3,500, 4,000 regular customers which they have, and a proper online database for all of them with their addresses, with their phone numbers. So I think Umang has a very, very strong foundation, and it's like a very, very nicely, I think the consumer base and the consumer satisfaction, I think that is something which is like very strong.
Alright, now that we've seen like how they've made a well-functioning supply chain, gotten around 1,500 SHGs women, and also figure out a way to have their revenue distributed, in this case that can be profitable and helpful for everybody, I wanted to figure out what your day-to-day looked like at Umang in itself, because I know from like personally talking to you that you ended up renting a house there, and you figured out a way to stay there for 45 days, get into the whole ecosystem. You had to walk sometimes all the way to the headquarters and come back. Sometimes you get had transport. So walk me through your day-to-day activities that happened there.
Alright, so I think typically, if you think about it, our day was supposed to begin at 7 a.m., but then the day would begin at 9 because obvious reasons. And then I think, so if you talk about Ranikhet specifically, Ranikhet as a village is known as the village of people with surnames Adhikari. So all the people there are Adhikari, and then the person who would deliver our food was known as Balam Adhikari, but then we would call him Ballu Bhaiya, and then Nishita improvised it to Billu Bhaiya. So first thing in the morning would be a call to him because he would supply us with food. So call for breakfast over there. We would get to breakfast. We had to report by 10:30, 11. So. As you already rightly mentioned, that the place where we were staying, that was actually quite far away. I would say around 2.5 kilometers away, because we were kind of in the city center, because the standalone building of Umang, it is in this place called Naini, between Naini and Kalika. So that is like secluded from the main area. So that's why we decided to stay in the main city, or the place where we stayed was Machkhali, which is on the outskirts of Ranikhet. So we would just wait there for the bus or wait there for the jeep, and then trying to negotiate the prices with the drivers, because they would realize that these people are not from here, so like tricking us or something on some days, but then us fighting back that no, this is the fare which you need to pay, you can't just take any amount that you want and all of that. Then we would reach the organization usually by 11. The routine of the day would be going there, making, so we would be assigned tasks for the day. Let's say we have to work on Excel, let's say we need to work on their marketing, let's say we have a particular field visit someday, so specific timings for that. Let's say we need to sit there with the women who are working in the knitwear, or let's say we need to help out in the store, or maybe see how the chamomile tea and all of that is happening. I remember there was this workshop which was being conducted in the middle of it, so sometimes going through that, seeing how that's functioning and all of that. So I think the daily work was mostly centered in the building, and then we would also go out for field visits, I think twice a week maybe. And then after that, coming back home, let's say around 5 again, fighting for a ride, or sometimes walking, right? So taking, like, just making sure that the view, so the hills, and it has this mesmerizing view with the fog coming in through the hills. So clicking pictures, walking back, and then again just making sure that you're done with all the tasks that you were supposed to do, and then starting the day again.
Right. So going a little bit deeper into the SHG portion and the field visits portion, I didn't really want to know about this, because you have a 1,500 strong group of people who you have to essentially organize in an unorganized sector, right? Even though the Fab India portion, let's say the retail market is very much organized, the back end of it has to be in a format where a lot of people have not been addressed with this industry before. Why don't you walk me through how Umang in itself as an NGO got these people together, and how your ROs helped in that, so like we can have a better idea about the organization itself?
Yes. So Umang basically was started by, the beginning of Umang was from this SHG. There was one standalone SHG which was started by this woman called Sunita Kashyap, which is the oldest woman as the working woman there. She has been with the organization for about 35 years now. She started her own SHG which was called Umang, and then people realized and people believed in the idea of the SHG, and they found value in the whole system of SHGs and trust in the brand which Grassroots was providing them, because Grassroots still, it might be on the verge of closing itself down, Grassroots as the standalone organization, but then Grassroots still has its back. So they found trust in the system and they believed in the system. So this one initial organization started by Sunita Kashyap, and everyone joined in, because they believe that if we are there together, we can fight out a lot of things. Let's say whether it be something like patriarchy, to something as, let's say, small as making sure you want to build something in your house, you want to build, let's say, a way towards the toilets, you want to build a biogas plant, you need money for that. How are you going to get that money? You don't want to go out and grab loans every time. You need something from your own, right? And also the best part about an SHG is, especially when it comes to in terms of finances, the SHG body, so they have this unified bank account that is providing them loans at minimal interest rates. And also the time duration for them to return that loan, and the terms and conditions, they are very simple. So the hassle of going to the banks is reduced, they are not dependent, and they are getting the money for what they are supplying. Let's say they are knitting it out, so they make sure that they are delivering it on time, they get the money, and then on the basis of, let's say, a proportionate system, they get loans out of it. So all of that is very simple for them, and I think Sunita Kashyap, I think she is an amazing woman. We had this interaction with us. So the last day which we were there, she took us out she took us in the woods, the three of us, and she was telling about herself and her family and how she started the whole thing, and how she was just 18 with a daughter, and like I think she was 18 when she got married, and she had a daughter, and then she had not completed her education. She was still in college, and she just started this organization because she wanted to do something, and she wanted to build something and create something that helps her and helps everyone inspire everybody. So I think that is something very inspirational.
Alright, I think we should now get to a more informal part of the conversation where we are going to, have a little rapid fire session. Like, let's say I'm going to ask you a question, limit your answer to like a word or a phrase or whatever you feel like is going to, culminate your whole portion there. Alright, so to conclude your whole experience over there, what is the one word that comes to your mind when I say Umang?
I would say eventful.
Eventful, sure. I mean, sure, the hills and the whole picturesque location might have made it, very eventful in itself. Alright, so if there was one word you want to describe or like introduce the world to your NGO, what would it be?
I think sustainability and women and collective effort of women. I think that stands
Collective
out.
effort of women. Good answer. Alright, so getting into the final concluding portion of the podcast in itself. Now you have spent 45 days. You have spent some quality time with Billu Bhaiya. Now there has also been your ROs you've interacted with, work you've done, Excels you've created, numbers you've crunched, and field visits you've gone to. Now the 45th day was the part where you're talking about where you had, a lot of coffee, you figured out, and talked to your friends and had a lot of fun. What was your journey back from Ranikhet to your home like?
For me, I think the journey was a daunting and a subtle realization while you walked. So the way to coming back to Nainital, which is my hometown, you go through this road and you see Umang right in the middle of it. And as we crossed it, it just hit me very hard that you are living a very, very privileged life. The fact that the idea that we have something as small as we have our own beds here, even on campus we have our own beds, we have a table and a chair to ourselves. There are so many people there who would be like 10 people sleeping in a room being happy, because eventually being happy despite all odds. They might not have electricity, they might not have good waste disposable mechanisms, they might not have like small things, let's say this cup for example, they might not have things of privilege, right? But then they might have to climb up, let's say 2 kilometers to reach their house and to reach to a biogas plant. But the fact that they still do all of it and they are happy at the end of it. I think the idea that we have a lot of things, but then you don't realize the importance of the things that you have until you see the people who don't have it and still being happy about it. I think that is something which I really thought about, in the fact that be happy for what you have and not take anything that you have for granted. I think that was my biggest learning from the internship.
Right, so humility in itself as a great value to have in this case as well. Okay, so to culminate everything, I wanted to get your last inputs about your final internship experience at Umang Live. So you have now figured out your ROs. We've talked a little about them themselves. You figured out the work you've done from the part of social welfare in itself, whether you talked about the knitting portion to be there, the part that went to Fab India, so the apricots portion, or let's say you have had the SHGs which you've interacted with. Your final takeaways in itself were including, let's say, humility and getting a better wholesome view of life and a holistic portion of life, where you're also very mindful about the environment that you're in, because even in this case, helping your community out in this case was essentially one of the major reasons that we ended up doing these internships. Alright, I wanted to congratulate you for completing this whole internship portion and coming for this podcast. Thank you for that as well. We're going to be back again very soon with yet another speaker, yet another NGO, and yet another fascinating story. Stay updated for the same by Insights by Outside X.